This is the BioCentury Show. Brought to you by BioEquity Europe. BioEquity is Europe's premier international showcase for financial dealmakers and biopharma executives to meet rising biotechs.
I'm joined today by Rachel King, interim CEO of Bio. Rachel's a former chair of Bio, the founder and former CEO of Glycomimetics, and her career also included serving as a senior vice president of Novartis, and before that, a decade at Genetic Therapy, Inc. She came out of retirement to take on the role of interim CEO of Bio in November. Rachel, I guess to start with, what brought you back into the world to do this? Why in the world did you want to do it, and what are your priorities now that you've been at Bio for a little bit?
Sure. Well, and thanks, Steve, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I will say this is one of the few things I would unretire for, is to come to Bio. I have loved Bio for so many years and worked, as you said, on the board as a member of the board and as the board chair. So it's close to my heart. And I think seeing that it was going through a transition and the board asked me to step in, I was happy to do that. In terms of priorities, I guess. I guess at the highest level, we have to advocate for policies that both support innovation and support affordable access for patients. I mean, those are the two core elements of what we do. And they have to always go hand in hand. One without the other doesn't work. It just does not achieve what we need to achieve as a society. I think 2023 is going to be a challenging year. There's a lot going on, but I think Bio is well positioned to be effective. And in that context, there are, I would say, probably four things that I would highlight. And I know we could probably have a long conversation about each one of these, but just to name them, I would say one is IRA implementation. And I mean both at the level of CMS and thinking longer term, what could we do potentially legislatively? I would say accelerated approval is another very high priority for us. We're very concerned about what appears to be a erosion of the accelerated approval pathway, and that has a big impact on our companies and on patients. Another area is capital formation. 2022 was a really tough year for biotech as far as that goes, and that's an important focus for us now. And then DEI is the other thing I would mention. I've often thought and long thought that we need diversity for excellence, and I think that there's a lot that Bio and the industry can and should be doing to try to increase that. So I would say those are the four priority areas.
So let's start with the first one, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. What has been the impact on Bio member companies? What do you anticipate the impact being, and what are the things that you think you might be able to change?
Yeah, so we have a lot of concerns about the government price setting aspects of the IRA, and I think that throws a damper on some of the capital formation issues that I also want to be talking about, because it disincentivizes investments, and in particular, the provisions that provide a special disincentive for small molecules relative to biologics are very concerning. I will say that there were some aspects of the IRA that we think are positive, the aspects that address the patient out-of-pocket costs and smoothing of out-of-pocket costs, so as well as some of the issues around the agricultural and environment sector. So it's not all bad news, but I think some of the disincentives for the industry are real. We're seeing effects also on orphan drug development, where you have exemptions that are tied to one, but not more than one orphan indication, exemptions from negotiation. So I think those are going to be very important to address as we go forward. You actually said something important, I think, Steve, if I could say, in the article that you wrote recently about the Orphan Drug Act, where you said that the reason that was effective, that has been effective, was because financial incentives aligned with patient needs. And I thought that was really well said. There are a number of areas here with the IRA where financial incentives do not align with patient needs, and that's what we need to be addressing as we look to how we could improve things.
So the key thing you said there is about the disparity, really, between the way the IRA treats small molecules, actually any drug that's approved under an NDA, and drugs that are approved as biologics. So drugs that are approved under NDAs are subject to price setting much earlier, after 9 years potentially, and there's 13 years for drugs that are approved under biologics. What does that mean? I mean, I think a lot of people would look at it and say, "Oh, well, bio would be celebrating that, right? Bio is all about biotech drugs."
Well, bio is not just about biologics. I mean, bio is about developing therapies that are going to help patients by whatever technology they use to get there. So, we support not just the development of biological drugs, but the development really of any drug. So we're concerned about anything that provides a disincentive for any class of drugs, and we think that is what the IRA does by setting up this juxtaposition of the 9 years versus 13 years.
So what can you do about it? It doesn't seem to me very likely that you're going to be able to persuade Congress in the next year or 2 years, maybe even longer, to open up those provisions of the IRA and make massive change.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be challenging. I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to be very busy trying to lay the groundwork for a longer term engagement that I think could potentially address those issues. I think that what we're going to need to do over the next couple of years in this particular Congress, where I do agree that I think most observers in Washington suggest that it's going to be tough to get most anything through Congress, not to mention things related to our specific interests. But what we need to do, what we can do, I think, effectively, is to spend that time building champions, because that's what we have found historically really helps us as bio, helps us on the Hill, is when we have individual champions and members of Congress who understand what we do, support what we do, understand the value to patients, and are willing to engage between them and their staffs in some of the complexity around providing the right incentives that, as we said, align financial incentives with patient needs. So building champions is what we're going to be doing. We're going to do that together with patient advocates, together with investors, with our members, and we're going to be very active with this new Congress. And I think we can be effective at that, which I think ultimately is going to provide the foundation for the potential success around these issues that we care about.
So that raises actually something I've always wondered about, which is that the representatives from places where there are thriving biotech industries in, Massachusetts and California, for the most part, are not champions of the industry. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, they aren't. Why do you think that is? And do you think that there's an ability or a potential to turn that around?
I am puzzled by that too, Steve, because, we always thought like Detroit was the place where the automakers were, and their great congressional advocates came from there as well. So I don't understand why that's not the case, but I am optimistic that over time we'll continue to build those relationships. We can't give up. We've got to continue to work hard on that by not only showing the benefit to patients, but also the economic development benefit to the specific congressional districts. We also want to involve the local companies. We want to involve the local employees and really try to build a base of advocates. So, we'll be working hard to try to do that.
So one of the things that I also find curious, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about this, there's been a discussion around bio and around the biotech industry for years that the reason that the public doesn't really support the industry, and that lack of public support for the industry translates into a lack of political support, is because the public doesn't really understand how important cutting edge science is, or because out-of-pocket costs are so high that they can't get the drugs that they need. But if you look at what happened in the pandemic, there's nobody really that doesn't understand that biotech companies and cutting edge science saved millions of lives, and in the United States, nobody's paid a penny for a vaccine or for most of the other countermeasures that the biotech industry created. So that suggests that maybe those ideas that really isn't what was driving it. What do you think?
I've thought about that a lot myself, Steve, too, because I think it's really, it's true. I think that the industry was tremendously effective, actually in a public-private partnership. I think that's an important thing to emphasize. We had an outstanding public-private partnership in Operation Warp Speed that helped us as humanity to do something which had never been done before. And it relied critically on the existence of a strong biopharmaceutical industry that was ready to come to the table and to contribute. And as you said, people didn't pay out of pocket for it, and so I'm puzzled. I'm puzzled about that. I think we need to continue to try to understand that better. I think we need to continue to tell the stories. What I find most moving and most effective often in individual conversations is when people have had a specific experience of their own life or a family member's life being extended or being improved by biotechnology therapeutics. And so I do believe that continuing to tell those individual patient stories and to bring those to the policy debate is what we have to do. So I haven't given up on that. I am puzzled by the story of the pandemic and why that hasn't been more fully appreciated. And I'm optimistic that as we have benefit of hindsight, perhaps when we can get out of some of the negative politics that came up around whole vaccine hesitancy movement and some of the concerns around that perhaps we'll be able to tell that story in a way that really is more well received or more fully received by the public. But I do think that again, we need to advocate not only for innovation but for affordable access. I think both of those are key. And we need to continue to highlight the stories of our successes.
Let's move on to the second priority you talked about, which is related to this issue of public perceptions, I think, which is accelerated approval. I would argue, I have argued in print that accelerated approval saved millions of lives. If you look at what's happened with AIDS drugs, they wouldn't have been created without accelerated approval. Many of the most important advances in cancer have relied on accelerated approval. But it's under attack. I think it's under attack partly because of concerns around one particular product, around what's happened with Aduhelm, but maybe it's broader than that. What are your concerns about what's happening, what could happen with that accelerated approval, and how do you engage to protect the pathway? Yeah.
So one of the things that is most concerning, I think, about the potentially erosive things that are being discussed now is this idea that an approval could be contingent on the initiation of a confirmatory trial, right? And I think that's a terrible, that would be a terrible outcome for small biotechnology companies. A lot of companies who face their first approval are running out of cash. They're kind of limping across the finish line sometimes to get the clinical trial completed and to get to the data. And if at the same time they had to initiate a confirmatory trial, if that were a requirement of approval, they just wouldn't get there. So I think we've really got to make clear how difficult that would be for the smaller companies. I think it would negatively impact larger companies as well, but we really need to be clear how impossible it could make it for some of the smaller companies to really get things across the finish line. And I think you're right that accelerated approval has brought tremendous advances. And when you think back to what happened in the AIDS epidemic with the support of patient advocates, it really demonstrated how important it is to think creatively about solutions for these really intractable diseases. And that's what accelerated approval enables us to do by the use of these surrogate markers. So I think we really need to continue to advocate. And I think this is actually an area where I think bio is particularly well positioned to tell these stories, because we do represent a lot of the smaller companies that are in that situation. So I think we can be very effective advocates around the need to preserve this pathway. Orphan drugs is another example, though, where it could really have a negative impact. Again, with this issue of the requirement for the confirmatory trial to be initiated, many times once an orphan trial is completed, it's very difficult to find. It would be very difficult to find additional patients for that confirmatory trial to initiate immediately. So I think we need to preserve the regulatory flexibility, and the agency they don't have to apply the provisions of accelerated approval, they can apply them. And I think they have applied their judgment in where they feel it's appropriate and where it's not. So I don't think that it should be diminished in any way. The FDA should retain their flexibility to make good judgments and to do so in a way that helps patients, but that also makes it possible for companies to continue to innovate.
Well, thanks. We're going to have to take a little break now. When we get back, we'll start with the other two priorities that you mentioned, and then we'll talk about some other things. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
The 23rd Bioequity Europe Conference heads to Dublin, Ireland in May 2023 with a program focused on how to create a new playbook for biotech success in Europe. In 2022, over 800 industry leaders from 30 countries joined Bioequity in Milan, Italy for 2+ days of strategic panels, one-to-one partnering meetings, and C-level networking. More than 150 biotechs selected by BioCentury presented their story to investors and potential partners. Don't wait, 2 of the last 3 in-person Bioequity conferences sold out. Register today and join BioCentury EBD in our Dublin Regional Host Committee at the industry's premier C-suite and investor conference. Visit bioequityeurope.com for more information.
We're back with Rachel King, interim CEO of Bio. Rachel, when we took a break there a moment ago, you were talking about accelerated approval and how increasing the requirements for accelerated approval can make it impossible for the smallest companies to bring products across the finish line. It seems to me that that's part of it. That also fits into what you were saying about the Inflation Reduction Act. That also is going to make it much more difficult, right, for small companies. They're going to have to make whatever it is that they're going to make from their products much quicker. And companies have told me that that's going to make it even more difficult for small companies to bring products across the finish line, that they're basically going to have to hand them off to the big companies. Do you think that's the case? And if it is that really such a bad thing?
Well, I think there's a lot in that question. So I think that both of those issues that we were talking about, the IRA and accelerated approval, they both feed into this issue of what kind of an ecosystem do we have in which our companies are operating, and what does that do to set up opportunities or barriers as far as capital formation is concerned. And if you look back at 2022, just to spend a moment on kind of what that looked like for our industry, it was a tough year from a capital formation perspective. And the IPO, the money raised on IPOs was down by something like 80%. The money raised on follow-on public offerings was down by something like 40%. And so you ask, why should we care about that? And I think when you look at the approvals of new drugs in 2022 and look at new chemical entities and new BLAs, products that went through CBER and CDER, where did they originate? 68% of those originated in small companies. Think about that. So the strong majority of new drugs approved in 2022 originated in small companies. And that was in a year when the ability of those companies to continue to finance programs was dramatically cut back. So as we look forward, we have to be very concerned about what the climate is like that is going to enable those companies to continue to innovate. And there are a number of things that I think Bio can do. One has to do with these kind of broader questions around, how do we ensure that the ecosystem exists, kind of broadly speaking, to encourage innovation and drug development. And there are also some things that we can be doing more specifically around supporting smaller companies, particular tax incentives or investment incentives, or things that we can do to try to minimize the cost of compliance that doesn't impose kind of a one-size-fits-all compliance requirement on some of these newly and smaller pre-revenue public companies. So I think there's a lot that we can do, and we're going to be very active in advocating both on the ecosystem-wide issues like we discussed on IRA and accelerated approval, as well as on the more specific issues around how can we help the smaller companies be in a better position to finance.
It's interesting because it's almost a cliche. It is a cliche. I think we've both been around this industry a long time, and at any point in time, you could say the science has never been more promising.
Yes,
it's never
yeah.
been more exciting. You could have said that 30 years ago. You could have said
That's
20
right.
years ago. You could have said it yesterday. It's true, right? So
Yeah.
you've got this tremendous excitement about the science, but there's a disconnect right now in the funding. It comes after 3 good years of capital formation.
Yeah.
But I wonder, if this combination, of a really tough time for companies raising money, the IRA, pressures on the Orphan Drug Act, pressures on from the Inflation Reduction Act. Are we seeing a kind of a step change maybe in the environment for biotech, or is that too gloomy?
I think that's too gloomy, Steve. I mean, I think that we do have a number of challenges. I think we've had a lot of challenges over the years, and so I don't know that I would say this is a more gloomy time than some that we have faced in the past. I do think, though, we have some very specific things that we need to engage on now, as we've been talking about, and I think that it's really important. I think as we look at these issues, to look at what do we think we can do in the short term, and how do we position ourselves to advocate effectively over the long term. So we really need to do both of those things. And at Bio, what we're trying to do is to look at what those are, how can we be effective in both of those areas, and how can we uniquely use Bio's resources and Bio's credibility, Bio's relationships, how can we uniquely bring those together to be most effective?
So one of the things that is also kind of continuous from the day I think Bio was started is that there's always this debate between people who say, Bio should be like a traditional trade association. It stick to its knitting, should only seek to intervene on issues that are very specific to the development of pharmaceuticals in the case of the biopharmaceutical side of Bio. And there are other people who say, no, we exist in this bigger in society, and we should seek to intervene, and that's what our employees and what our customers expect on broader social issues, right? How do you think about that, and how do you think about the balance there?
So I think Bio needs to focus primarily, and I think we are focused primarily on advocacy as it relates to the biotechnology industry. At the same time, as you said, there are a number of important issues that really are kind of cross-cutting. I don't think I would say that we can make a generic statement, we should always do this, we should always do that. We need to look carefully at each issue. We need to understand how it affects our companies and our employees, and we need to advocate for areas where we think those are most important. It's tough sometimes to achieve consensus around a big and diverse table like the one that we have at an organization like Bio. So that's another issue. I think many of our individual members are very effective and persuasive advocates in their own individual roles. We certainly welcome and encourage that. I think, again, achieving consensus around the table for some of the more complex social issues is a challenge that is a bit of a different matter. I think our focus will always be on biotechnology, but we will, as we're able to achieve consensus, we may take positions on broader issues to the extent that that's what our members and our employees and our companies feel we need to do.
So one of those is the fourth issue that you raised, diversity in clinical trials, inclusion in clinical trials, reducing disparities in access to healthcare. And it's not only your companies and your members and the public that's telling you to do that. Regulators are telling you to do that. The FDA's implementing new requirements along those lines, and they're rejecting applications of products that haven't been tested in a sufficiently diverse populations. What's your thinking about what needs to happen on diversity and inclusion, what Bio can do, what its individual members can do?
Yeah. So the reason that we need diversity fundamentally is for excellence. Right? I think we will get better at what we do to the extent that we have more diverse people around the table, more diverse viewpoints. better diversity in our clinical trials. So I think diversity is a pathway to excellence. I think that's important to see it that way. There are a number of things that we can do at Bio. One example you gave is in clinical trial diversity. We have a roundtable coming up actually next week, which is a follow-on to some earlier work that we've done, where we're coming together to share with member companies, with patient groups, with people from the FDA to talk through how can we more effectively incorporate some of the requirements and desires, objectives for diversity in our clinical trials. We're also doing a number of things to try to help our companies ensure that they have a strong, diverse workforce. We're working with groups like Women in Bio to continue to build those ties. We have been working with member companies to do surveys to try to profile what are best practices so we can share those among the different companies on data gathering and then on reviewing the data and how we can respond to that. We've used our LinkedIn page to try to connect to diverse initiatives. So we're really trying to bring everything we can to the table to have information, connections, sharing best practices to continue to advance what the industry does on that front. And I think that we'll all benefit from that.
I want to shift over a little bit to bio and to what's going to come up, what's going to come next, right? So you're the interim CEO. Obviously, I think from this conversation, it's clear you're not just a placeholder. You're being very active in what you're doing. What comes next? What's the process for finding someone to replace you, and what's the timeline for that?
So Ted Love, who's our vice chair, is leading our search committee, and he has put together a group of, I think, about maybe 10 or 12 board members who are forming that committee. So it's a diverse and representative group of our board. It's going to be a very inclusive process and a robust process. And I'm confident that we're going to end up with an excellent person in this role. Hard to say exactly how long it's going to take. It would be nice if we could have someone in place at the time of the convention. That's aggressive. I'm not sure if that's going to be possible or not. But what I do feel confident in is that it will be an inclusive and a robust process, and that at the end we'll have an excellent person in this role.
And what do you think that the next person who takes on this role at Bio, what kind of face do you think that Bio needs to present to the world? How does it differentiate itself from pharma and from other parts of the kind of the ecosystem that it's
So I think for Bio itself, as I've alluded to a number of these comments I've made today, we've got a diverse membership in terms of the companies, the people around the table, and we have a large board. We also do a lot of outreach to try to include different organizations, different views, whether it's patient advocates or state organizations or national organizations around the world. So I think Bio has done an excellent job, and I think we'll continue to do a good job of convening these different people around the table. So I think in that context, then Bio also needs to continue to think about how do we best position Bio and how can we be most effective, most uniquely effective on some of these issues that we've been talking about. As far as the person, I think there are a lot of different kinds of things a person in this role could bring to be effective. So I think it's not necessarily a simple list you could make to say the person needs to have this specific background or this specific skill set. But I think it needs to be someone who can talk across those different groups, who can advocate well, who can communicate well, and who can really speak with passion about the value of biotechnology.
Well, great. Thanks, Rachel. It's been great talking to you. I look forward to more conversations.
Thank you, Steve. I do too.
And thank all of you for watching.
Great. Thanks.
The BioCentury Show is brought to you by BioEquity Europe. BioEquity is Europe's premier international showcase for financial dealmakers and biopharma executives to meet rising biotechs.